right, folks. Thank you very much for joining us on a Tuesday afternoon. I forgot what day it was. Welcome back to the Omohundro Institute's Digital Projects Coffee House. I'm Jim Ambuski, and very pleased to be co-convening this series with Martha Howard, who is not here today, but we are ably assisted by Laurel C. From the OI on today's program. I'm very excited. To welcome our two of our colleagues today, Rachel Wheeler from Indiana University, Indianapolis, and Sarah Eyerly from Florida State University. They're both full professors at their respective institutions, and they'll be talking to us about Singing Box 331 and Moravian Soundscapes. We were just chatting in the anteroom beforehand that the Moravians are great in part because they record so many things that frustratingly other people in the same area, particularly in North Carolina, do not. And so they've allowed me to figure out a lot about my own work on Scots immigrants in this period because of their vociferous record keeping. But let's get the party started then and turn it over to both Rachel and Sarah, who are going to talk to us about two exciting projects. And then we'll do some questions and answers afterwards. As a reminder, please do feel free to pop your questions in the chat or raise your hand when we get to the Q&A portion of the session, and I'll moderate from there. But Sarah, Rachel, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you.
Much. As Jim said, we're going to be talking about two digital projects today. Both of them are collaborative and both focus on archival sources from the Moravian Church in Pennsylvania and also not really North Carolina, but some places beyond Pennsylvania. So I will turn to our first question, and we're going to talk about both projects, and then happy to take your questions at the end.
So the first question we were posed was, how did this get started, and why did we want to go digital? So really, this project started as kind of a side project that happened when the larger book project, for me at least, was not happening. And it grew organically out of relationships that had built over the years and working in the Moravian archives, working with members of a descendant community in Wisconsin. And then meeting Sarah, and once we had this new community of scholars and community members, and we were focusing on creating something sounded, it really made sense, and we really started thinking about wanting to do something that could be multimedia. And obviously that's something that digital allows, that's not possible in a print world.
Yeah, and I think we were also thinking about the permanency of the project, and so we ended up publishing Singing Box 331 as a print article through the quarterly so that it would have that kind of permanence. And then this digital site, which really showcased the multimedia elements, was developed around that article.
Josh Piker was very enthusiastic and supportive in letting us think through this from the beginning, that it would be multimedia and that it merged with the quarterly's interest in developing a digital component as well. So we felt very lucky to have the quarterly really support this from day one as a multimedia project. And that as people who both wanted to go up for tenure or for promotion, we wanted to have, it was important to us to have a peer-reviewed component of it as well.
For the second project, Moravian Soundscapes, for me, this was a first book project. I was an assistant professor at the time. I needed to earn tenure and publish a book in my field, musicology. And I decided, for similar reasons, permanency and reach, and also the way that books are treated within the tenure review process, to publish a print book and then put the multimedia components of that work onto this website. So there are sound maps, there are sound recordings, there are archival documents, photographs, and for a project in music, it really made sense to have that multimedia digital companion site. I had considered building this as a born digital book, but again, felt that that would, at the time that was being developed in like 2018, 2019, it would have been very risky to do that. So I, in the end, kind of split the multimedia components into this website and then ended up publishing this print book through Indiana University Press.
Next questions are, how are the sites used? Have we had much engagement with users? And what have we learned? So a lot of, for Singing Box 331, the digital version on the William and Mary site is kind of one component of it, and that houses a lot of the recordings. We did the 3 different recordings of this single hymn that was written in Mohican. We did, as during that time, we did much the same process with 8 different hymns, which we created then a print hymnal and also recordings of all those hymns. So the hymnal exists as a separate thing that the congregation, the community on the reservation, uses. So that's available to them. There's been some interest by Moravian churches as well. But by far, most users seem to be coming to this through the William and Mary site, and I've heard mostly from colleagues, faculty who are using this in their classes, in their courses, in early American history or various different kinds of courses. But by far, that seems to be the largest use for this. And I hear back, I haven't heard a whole lot. I do, I've zoomed in occasionally, and I love doing that to courses, teaching this. But I hear mostly, yeah, it teaches well. Which is
For Moravian Soundscapes, my sense is it's used a little bit differently. It seems like many users are coming in through the print book and then being directed from the book to the website. I originally envisioned the website would be a place that people could come, that it would be publicly and globally accessible, that they might actually discover the book that way. But it seems that the pathway is actually sort of running in the opposite direction. And I've really enjoyed hearing from people who reach out via email for the most part, who are just people living in Pennsylvania who are interested in Pennsylvania history, who actually are reading the book and then thinking about some of the local history that's reflected in the research behind the book, because it does have this trans-historical narrative that starts in the 18th century and continues to the present day. So I get the sense that this readers are approaching this from, the physical book and then going into the site in order to learn more. I originally hoped that people would take the book to some of the places that are indicated in the mapping projects that are on the site, because you can quite precisely use the ArcGIS maps to kind of stand in some of the locations that are discussed and listen to the sounds that have been recorded in those places. And I guess similar to Singing Box 331, I think people do also use it to teach, and that includes in musicology, people who are doing history, people who are focusing on some aspect of local Pennsylvania history.
the next question we had was, who's responsible for the research? Did students participate? And who remains responsible for editorial decisions? So it's maybe a little bit different in both of the projects. Singing Box 331 sort of built from my research in the history of Moravian and congregational missions to Mohicans, and Sarah's research in the music history of the Moravian Church. But then there was definitely, students were more involved, I guess, in the, well, Sarah, why don't you speak to the ways that your music students were involved in?
Yeah, so my students were involved in the Singing Box 331 project, and that they helped to record the first set of hymns in Mohican that we did. So they worked for 2 semesters to basically prepare musical editions of those hymns so that we could sing them again. And then they worked with linguist Chris Harvey, who was also another collaborator on the project, on the texts and learning how to pronounce and sing those texts. And then there was also a group of students from the University of Wisconsin Whitewater who worked on those project as well, and they helped to record the second version of the hymns that we recorded at the Church of the Wilderness in Bowler, Wisconsin.
Much of the archival research, I mean, that was mostly just that was Sarah and me. But then as we moved towards the sounding and the multimedia, then we drew on our other collaborators as well. So this is our Chris Harvey there, the second from the left. He's the linguist, and then Bill Miller is the Stockbridge Mohican singer-songwriter who he did the recording for version 3, which was kind of ditching the Moravian tune and creating his own music to set the text to.
Yeah, and I will say for Moravian Soundscapes, it was a similarly collaborative project that I used over many semesters actually as a teaching tool. But the most important partnership that I had was with Mark Sciucchetti, who is named on the project as a principal collaborator. So Mark at the time was a doctoral student at Florida State in geography, and he was also a master's student in musicology, which serendipitously really worked for this project. So he and I did about 2 years of geospatial field work in and around Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and other Moravian sites in eastern Pennsylvania to basically build out the geospatial infrastructure of the maps that are a part of the project, and then to also begin to record and resound some of those locations. And some of the other collaborators are named on the website, as you can see down below, which included, many semesters worth of undergraduate research students and graduate students who were working on the project, and I'm really grateful to all of them. I would have not been able to accomplish all of the different elements of this project without their help.
For the technical issues, I'm definitely I'll start with the second question in terms of tech background. I have very little, and I've been intrigued by the digital components and the possibilities. But had always been rather intimidated, which for me was another reason why working with William and Mary Quarterly, where they pretty much handled the tech element, because to me it felt like the bar of entry into digital history projects was pretty high, and that I already felt kind of overwhelmed by the number of different systems and the ballooning of kind of tech in just day-to-day life as a professor. So I guess frankly I love the possibilities, but I was rather scared by the how much expertise is needed. And so I think we were starting to work collaboratively, and I think that was a huge component of it to realize, like, okay, not everybody has to be an expert in each of the elements of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, that collaboration was such an important part of both of these projects, because we all had different skills and expertise that when put together could really produce something far greater than any of us could have accomplished individually. I think for Moravian Soundscapes, I already had a background as a historical performer and as a sound artist and sound designer, but I didn't have any background in ArcGIS. Um, that's expertise that Mark Sciucchetti brought to the project, and other students who worked on the project brought different types of expertise as well that really augmented what we could do. And at the time, FSU had no infrastructure for supporting DH work. And so we were really on our own. It took a long time just to even get permission to be able to host the site through FSU, and that's come with some drawbacks and downfalls over time. If you look at the site now, well, it looks quite ugly because FSU has just gone through a rebranding process, and they basically pulled down our beautiful shell that kind of matched the 18th century archival documents and put up their brand new rebranded shell, which doesn't look great. So we'll have to go through a process of editing it and revising it over time. And I do think that that's worth thinking about for all of these projects, is that they're living and they're ever changing. A book and an article, those things are what they are. And in 100 years, you'll be able to find them in whatever, data aggregator possesses them. But these sites are constantly changing and require upkeep, and that has been a lot. Would think about the labor that has gone into these sites.
Right. Yeah, no, the Singing Box 331 platform has changed as well, that it began as a separate site that the William and Mary Quarterly had built, and it was on the OI website, but now it's available within the OI reader, which is wonderful to have it there and it's accessible. It also looks a little bit different, and it isn't it's a little different from what we had originally developed. So we've been working with the quarterly to try to make sure all that functionality is there within the new version.
I will call your attention, if you want to scan the QR code down here at the bottom, it will take you to the part of the Singing Box 331 project that is called People. And I think from the very beginning, when we were working with Josh and the editorial team at the quarterly, we had this vision to be able to name and to make visible all of the people whose labor had gone into the producing of the site. And that even includes Color Outside, who helped develop the site, the people who worked there, down to the students and filmmakers who participated. And I will say that one of the things, jumping back to Moravian Soundscapes, that over time, I think as technologies change, we're probably going to want to come into some of these mapping frameworks and redo the way that they look, and that's going to require a kind of development and ongoing commitment to doing that and to developing that expertise over time as technologies change.
We've covered some of that. I don't know, Sarah, do you have suggestions for, you've done more work with your students than you have more grad students. I don't have grad students here.
I think that one of the things I learned about working with students on this project was not just the value of collaboration and the fact that any collaborator brings a different set of skills that's going to lend something to the project that might be quite unexpected. Is also just the idea that, it was a type of teaching that I hadn't really done before attempting to do this type of research project. So often we do share our research in our classes, but actually having to do the research with students, that type of out of classroom teaching. Sometimes this work was tied to courses, but many of the time it was not. It was just working with students separately on these projects. And I think that really taught me about the value of all the different types of teaching we might be able to do.
And for a few years now, I've been working with, doing kind of a project with some students within a course, trying to develop a story map, an ArcGIS story map on a related but distinct project, just to kind of dip my toe a little bit more in the water of that back end of things. And yeah, So, and currently, well, my institution they started a program last year to get first year students involved in research. And it's been interesting that I had 3 students sign up to work with me. 2 of them have kind of faded away but I had a very discreet, okay, we can work on this research and, um, work in these Moravian records, which are accessible, and we'll see where it goes. I'm not like banking on this, but if something comes out of it, wonderful. If not, great. If not, that's no big thing. But got an absolutely amazing returning student who's like totally gung ho, and I think she'll really be key to helping me move this particular distinct story map forward in a way that you just don't know until it's so people dependent. Um,
Yeah, and we there are, if you go on the Singing Box 331 site, this is just some areas of that people uh, tab within the project. You can kind of read about some of the different people, students, and many others who are participants in this project. And I think that concludes our sort of formal answering of these questions, but we're really happy to engage in conversation with all of you today and to talk more through them.
and the top QR code is Singing Box 331, and the bottom is Moravian Soundscapes, I think. Is that right?
Yeah.
It'll take-
Well, Rachel, Sarah, thank you very much. That was great. And as folks are contemplating their questions, and again, feel free to pop them in the chat and I'll call on you, or please do raise your hand. I wonder if I could ask the both of you to reflect on a kind of a big picture question I have. You both really talked about your journey to doing a digital project. And Sarah, you mentioned the landscape in 2018 was not conducive for you to do a born digital project only. So I'm wondering, um, given what you know now and having gone through this fiery trial of sorts, what would you do differently? What would you keep the same? And what do you wish you could have done but couldn't accomplish when you began the project?
Yeah, I what I would have liked to have done if it had been possible at the time is have a infrastructure available at my institution that could really support DH work. I knew, for instance, there's a Moravian researcher at Lehigh University, Scott Paul Gordon, who did some amazing work with records from the Moravian Church from the settlement of Christiansbrunn with his students. And they had at the time an existing DH team that helped he and his students to build that site out. Um, I I've worked since then to really advocate for that type of infrastructure here at FSU, and I know many institutions are building that, but it would have been wonderful to have some help. Although I will say that not having that help led Mark and I and some of the other people who worked on the project to have to, you know, be quite creative in how we learned to build this site. We had to learn how to use Drupal, for instance, from the ground up, because that was the platform that FSU would support. We also had a brief stint with Reclaim hosting where we attempted to host the site there, but we're eventually able to move it back to FSU. But I would have loved to have been able to create something that would have been even more seamlessly integrated with the book, um, if there had been that type of support at the time.
for a while, I see Simon's question there. For a while, I've been advocating or trying to build up support for an idea of kind of doing in-person or, in-house internships between classes, like combining a geography class with my American religion course and, having them meet up together for the last 5 weeks of the course to do this kind of work. I haven't really been able to make that happen yet, but to me, it's because I think it takes such an institutional investment to provide that kind of infrastructure. So I think there are a lot of universities that have more or less active digital history centers that can help with that. But I think in some ways, a shoestring budget version of that could happen with, two courses collaborating together. Um, and
Yeah, I
that would
could,
bring the students together from different disciplines to learn more, but really to bring their own expertise.
and maybe I could just speak to that to Simon's question for Moravian Soundscapes. At FSU, the colleges are really separated. So we're in our own College of Music. And so in terms of their infrastructure, they're very separated in terms of students taking courses. But what made a difference here was being able to get internal research funding so that I was able to pay students as research assistants on the project and pay for their travel so that we could go and do the field work that was necessary for the project. So that type of research funding really helped to bridge um, over the boundaries of colleges. And so there was a lot of collaboration between the College of Music and geography because of that.
Alexander has a very good question about how do we share and promote new DH resources? How do you draw new viewers to your respective projects?
Great question. um, yeah, I'm not sure. That's something I certainly would like to, and it's something I'm contemplating with this distinct story map I'm working on that relates to the Connor family, the Connor Prairie Living History site here. Um, you can build it, but will anybody come? And I've had some conversations with the museum about are they interested in partnering on it? But it gets very complicated. So I haven't found a good solution. Certainly having this having Singing Box 331 published in, as a print article and through an established, um, a peer-reviewed journal, that certainly did a lot of work for us in getting the word out and having people see it. But I think it's a real challenge to do now.
I'll just add that I'm similar to the idea that these are living sites and living projects, that the research work on that is allied to both of these sites is continuing. And I think that that will draw in new audiences because, many DH sites, the people who've created that continue to do that work and to develop it over time. So I know for Singing Box 331, Rachel, I don't know if you want to talk about the Joshua book and some of the projects around that I think are going to draw new audiences. And similarly for Moravian Soundscapes, Bethlehem and three other worldwide Moravian sites have just now been made a World Heritage Site combined. And so I'm working on those sites now in Bethlehem to develop sound installations for the World Heritage presentation. I think that's going to draw new audiences to this. So it is kind of like a living research process that's going to draw people back to these original sources.
Right. So we're working together now on a biography of a Mohican man. And rather than a straight up microhistory sort of biographical account, we're trying to really build on the methods that we used for Singing Box 331 and intersperse contemporary collaborations that have their own outcomes, but what we really found with Singing Box 331 is that it was in the process, like having the project of doing something together facilitated relationships and a depth of relationships that would have been very difficult if it were more, we have these questions, we're coming to you, we want you to answer these questions, and now we're going to write this up in some kind of scholarly article. It was kind of really, the collaborations provided the occasion to have the time together to get to know people. Um, so what we're hoping, we've got a few new collaborative projects that we hope will have a public facing component that will kind of link back to, we'll build from and link back to some of these, the Singing Box 331 and other digital components. So I think I think being digital, embarking on a digital project also prompted us to think much more broadly about public history and reaching other audiences and who is, what perspectives can be represented in these ways, but yeah, I think there's a privilege that both of us have in being tenured faculty at reasonably stable institutions and being able to apply for funding that has facilitated this kind of work that allows us to keep working on these kinds of projects. And that's certainly not, in academia today, that's not a given.
Angel O'Donnell is asking, are there areas of the site that you notice that have received lots of interest?
Hmm. I haven't, that could probably be answered by digging into analytics, right? Which, I'll admit I have not, pursued that very, very thoroughly.
Well, we don't have the analytics, but we do know what people are teaching.
Mhm.
And they're often teaching the three recordings and the contrast between them and the people that came together to make those recordings and what the resonances of those pieces are.
Yeah, and I think the videos have really received as kind of an entryway for non-academics to say, okay, well, watch this, or for undergrads or whoever to, start with this, and you kind of get the conceptual idea, you see the people, and then it's a little bit easier to go through to make their way or be oriented as they're working through through the print materials, through the written component.
Yeah, I would say for Moravian Soundscapes, it's probably the sound map that's called Bethlehem in 1758 that gets the most traction because it is so linked to real buildings and spaces that still exist from the 18th century in that area, and people are very interested in them, and especially now with the new World Heritage Site being built.
I have a follow-up that follows up on actually Alexandra and Angel's questions about you were talking about audience, and we've been talking about outreach and bringing people into the site. I'm wondering then, as as you're thinking about applying for funding or you're pitching these projects to broader audiences, and you kind of talked a little bit about this in your presentation, but how do you help them understand that they can gain something fundamentally different when they, hear the past and the context in which those sounds were created, as opposed to simply reading about something from a letter, an observation, or something like that?
And I think that's one of the most important things that we wanted to convey in Singing Box 331. And I think it makes when you hear the first version that Sarah did with her students at Florida State, I'll sometimes start a class. I won't give them, I'll do it in an intro class where they don't have any background or introduction, and I'll just play the recording and I'll ask them to say, well, what do you think? What language do you think this is? What religion do you think it is? And, it sounds like Bach. They'll always say, well, clearly it's Christian and it's probably German or Latin. And I'll do the same with Bill Miller's version. And they'll say it's clearly not Christian. And they'll identify, they'll recognize that it's probably native language. Um, so it really, when we created that first version, it is the most archivally accurate recreation of the historical materials, and it completely erases anything that's recognizably native. And that says something both about what we think native sounds like, but also it reflects what's available, what the Moravians wrote about. So that we know from the archival accounts, we know that hunters were singing these hymns while hunting. But we have no idea at all what the Moravian missionaries did not record how did they sound, right? So, but we have lots of, they wrote lots about what, European Moravian musical practices of the time were like. So, in making these different versions, we really felt like you could hear the erasures of the archives. And it's an immediate, people can, instantly, that's listening to those different versions together, you can understand what's possible from the archives. And I think that makes the argument about the challenges of working with colonial archives in a way that takes a lot more words than two recordings.
Well, I'm convinced. I'll give you funding. That's Well, Rachel, Sarah, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to offer us about the projects? And you've given us a little bit of a sense of what you're working on next, but if you'd like to build on to that, that would be terrific.
Yeah, and we'd also like to hear more about what other people are working on. So I could say a little bit about one of the projects that again has kind of come out of just relationships that have built up, kind of in the process of doing this, people we meet with, and then like, oh, what can we do? So I have a colleague here at IU in music arts technology, and he's got an interest in spatial acoustics, and so he was working on one of the projects, and then the Eiteljorg Museum has a new curator who's an Anishinaabe artist. And we started talking, Tim, the music arts technology guy, he's got funding to play with augmented reality equipment. So now we're working with Monica and some of her art that she's got on display at the museum, and thinking about creating kind of a virtual and augmented reality experience that could be located at the museum. And we hope this is also will be a thing in itself, but also a stepping stone to something we'd like to do related to Joshua's biography, which is to do some sort of multimedia experience, digital project for the Philadelphia airport, which is at the site where Joshua's community was interned at the end of or just after the Paxton rebellion, or yeah, do I have that right? After the Paxton Rebellion, they were at the actual physical site of the airport. And so thinking about ways that, kind of the relationships, the people that are interested in the same things, but for different reasons. And I think that's been where and when our collaborations have been fruitful is, and we sometimes talk about it as a Venn diagram, that we're not looking for fully intersecting, overlapping circles. But if people are coming into this project for their own reasons and that the project will fuel their own goals and aims, whether that's playing with augmented reality, whether that's, thinking about museum spaces and how to curate materials, then you've got the pieces needed for a project to move forward successfully.
Yeah, and we were just talking before joining today that our research is moving out of basically a digital space to be placed in a site. So it's digital in nature, like the augmented, reality presentation at a museum, or an experience that visitors can have at the Philadelphia airport or some of the Moravian sites in Pennsylvania. So I think we hadn't really quite thought about that until talking through it this morning. But for some reason, yeah, our research is moving actually into places, but it's still remaining in the realm of digital technologies.
And I think that's a great place to end it. When can we expect your new biography? I should ask.
When we get our admin duties under control or move out of those roles, I don't know.
Entirely understand. Well, Rachel, Sarah, thank you very much. This was terrific. Very delighted to learn about both of these projects. I think the rest of the audience is too. Um, for folks, our last OI Coffee House of the year is on December 10th. I'll be hosting that one, and alongside my colleague Ann Smart Martin from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who will be presenting on a collaborative project that we are embarking on with her at the Rosenzweig Center on the ledger of a guy named William Ramsey, who was a merchant in Virginia in the beginnings of the Seven Years' War. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see you soon. And if you'd like to present next term, please do email me or Martha. We'd love to have you present to our group. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.